George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Welcome to the mother of all talk shows. Sorry, I'm a couple of minutes late. In fact, prepare yourself for some technical roughhousing this evening. I'm in a basement in the eastern part of Europe, rather closer to the war zone than I would have chosen to be if I'd known what was going to happen in Moscow last night. In fact, I'm in a place where the first rockets will fall if this becomes an all-out, no-holds-barred general European war. And don't think I'm exaggerating, because what happened last night changes everything. The drone attacks on the Kremlin, which could well have killed the president of the Russian Federation in his government headquarters, in his residence. As a matter of fact, he wasn't even there, but he could have been there. And the fact that these two drones were able to land on the roof of the Kremlin is a matter of the gravest significance, as all but the most stupid can surely work out. Of course, the Russians say that they shot these drones down. I'm not in a position to say whether they did or whether they didn't, though if they didn't, they definitely would claim that they did. The video I have seen, if genuine, seems to suggest that both of these drones hit their target. Now, the question of where these drones were launched from is, of course, an apposite one. And some fools, the same kind of fools who told us that Russia blew up its own pipeline, that the Nord Stream 2, a 21 billion euro investment, half of it paid by Russia, was blown up by Russia so that they could never again supply gas to Europe when they were doing rather nicely, doing so over decades in the past. The same kind of fools are now saying that Russia landed two rockets on its own Kremlin heartland in order, I don't know, to do what? To justify an escalation? Well, escalation there definitely will be, whether it was a false flag operation or not. Think about it. It's a matter of simple logic. If it was a false flag, its purpose was to justify escalation. If it wasn't a false flag, escalation will definitely be the result. So it's otiose as a question. Who did this deed? The deed was done and filmed, and it is a matter, I'm sure, of the greatest embarrassment in Moscow that the Kremlin was apparently defenseless, at least until the last moments, to hostile enemy ordnance being launched by Ukraine or by people acting for Ukraine. And I want to turn to that matter now. Some people say, well, drones of that size could not have flown all the way from Ukraine. They must have been launched inside Russian territory. Well, I don't know if that is true or not. I know that the rocket time from the Ukrainian border, as was, to Russia is only a couple of minutes. So I'm not necessarily convinced that these drones could not have flown from the Ukraine. But if they were launched inside Russia, they were clearly launched by agents of Ukraine. But I want to widen the circle of responsibility much more significantly. Blinken, the Secretary of State for the United States of America, said that he absolutely could not verify that these two drone weapons had landed on the Kremlin, even while the rest of us were watching it on screen. I don't know if it made terrestrial television, but it made everybody else's screen light up at the moment that it did so. I was woken and told to get onto my screen and saw it actually happening, but Blinken absolutely could not verify. The Pentagon then later said that they had no advance knowledge of this attack on the Kremlin. Well, whether they did or whether they didn't, the responsibility is theirs. Ukraine long ago lost agency in this conflict. Ukraine is not in a position to make a peace settlement, as we all know, as Boris Johnson was sent to remind them. Ukraine cannot prosecute the war without the wherewithal being constantly shoveled into them by the other NATO powers. And all those NATO powers are all under the direction of the United States of America. Only Hungary and Turkey can be said to be independent players any longer inside NATO, and NATO can do what it likes, whether Hungary and Turkey like it or not. So the ultimate responsibility for this attack on the Kremlin lies in the White House in Washington, D.C. I mentioned the White House because I want to ask you to imagine, just for a moment, an Iranian drone attack on the White House, on the Lincoln bedroom or wherever Joe Biden sleeps, on the bathroom on which he sits for many hours, I'm told, every evening and through the nighttime hours. Imagine if a Chinese drone or an Iranian drone or a Cuban drone or a Venezuelan drone, never mind two of those, had landed on top of the White House. What would now be the American response? I'm asking you to imagine that because I'm now going to ask you to imagine what Russia is going to do. Now, all the signs are that Putin is a canny fellow, calm, cool, collected, despite all the efforts to paint him as some kind of madman who woke up one morning and decided to attack his neighbor. All the signs are to the contrary of that. As a matter of fact, I know many Russians who think he's far too canny, cool, and collected, far too controlled in the way in which he is conducting this conflict. And many of those are in the military or are ex-military. So I'm asking you to imagine what pressure is now on President Putin to answer this provocation, as it turned out, but what could have been the decapitation of the Russian state. It's that serious. The entire leadership of the Russian Federation could have been in that building and presumably frequently are. Now, in former times, the military officers responsible for guarding the Kremlin would have already been up against the wall in the Lubyanka and shot for negligence. And it's not a mistake that is likely to be allowed to happen again. Neither is it a provocation, an assassination attempt that is going to go unanswered. So what will the answer be? Well, I'm no lawyer, but Russia now has the right of self-defense under international law. And that right of self-defense is not just against the immediate belligerent in the special military operation, which will now presumably have to be declared to be a war, an actual war rather than an SMO, but that right of self-defense extends to those who assisted Ukraine or its agents to conduct an assassination attempt on the leadership of Russia. What would you do? What would any country do? What would any country do if another country attempted to decapitate its leadership in an act of military aggression? Something which, incidentally, the cool, calm, and collected Putin has not done to Vladimir Zelensky. Throughout more than a year of conflict, he's been free to walk around with each and every international visitor, from Ursula von der Leyen to Bono of U2. He's been in and out like a fiddler's elbow into the bunker in Kiev, and they walk around the streets. Even Joe Biden did it. And Russia did not attack them. But it will now surely have to show that it has the wherewithal and the will to actually do so. And so it's quite likely, but I can't guarantee it, that the first retaliation will fall on Ukraine and on the Ukrainian leadership. That's why the leader, Zelensky, has run away. Don't think I'm just insulting him. The Finnish government has announced that though Zelensky is in Finland and was supposed to be there for one day, he is now going to stay in Finland for an indeterminate period, maybe forever, maybe as a staging post on the way to Miami or Tel Aviv or whichever beach Zelensky is now thinking of spending the rest of his life on. The fact is, the Ukrainian leadership, whether Zelensky or the broader leadership, are now entirely legally open to deadly retaliation from Russia. And it would seem to me that however cool, calm, and collected Vladimir Putin is, he's not going to be able to sit this one out. That widens the war, makes the war escalate in a dramatic way, a more dramatic way than anything that's happened during the last 14 months. And that must put pressure on Europe to get off the pot or to piss. If they are on this pot, they better start pissing. And if they want to get off the pot, they better get off it quickly. And that's why we must hope that somebody sane in the European Union, in the European half of the NATO membership, will call a halt to this. Maybe it will be Germany, which has the most to lose, which already has lost the most. Maybe it will be France, whose leader could do with a bit of distraction on international affairs, if you get my drift. A break from his forces clubbing, gassing, and shooting his own people on a daily basis on the streets of France, all the streets of France, not just Paris, but sleepy hamlets and Riviera resorts are filled with angry protesters being gassed and clubbed and shot by Macron's police. This would probably be a good time, President Macron, to launch some kind of dramatic foreign intervention to bring about a halt to this conflict before this escalation gets even more out of control. That's not all we'll be talking about tonight, but I've no doubt it will dominate. But there are other issues. Let's start with the United States itself. Let's start with the ever plummeting poll ratings and IQ, intelligence quotient, of the American leadership. You know, I always make the joke that Richard Nixon was sure nobody would ever shoot him because Spyro Agnew was next in line. Well, nobody's going to shoot Joe Biden because Kamala Harris is next in line. And if you thought Joe Biden's videos were embarrassing, you haven't seen Kamala Harris yet. This woman is on laughing gas or on LSD. You'd certainly need to be on LSD to understand a word that she is saying. Poor little President Marcos of the Philippines was stood next to her the other day, where she uttered forth a stream of consciousness so hallucinogenic that Marcos was left utterly bemused as to what he could possibly say in reply. And this woman is a faint heartbeat away from the presidency of the United States of America. The Democratic Party is now in a state of crisis, that it has an Alzheimer's patient as its nominee and a lunatic as his running mate. Now, that might or might not, depending on the level of cheating involved, allow them to win the election, but how can it possibly allow them to govern in a way that doesn't look like the inmates of Ward 5 of Bellevue or Broadmoor, the hospital for the criminally insane in England, running the show. And therefore, they must, as a matter of simple logic, be hoping that somebody else can ride to the rescue. Is that person Robert F. Kennedy Jr.? I don't know about you. I'm not giving him a blank check or anything. I just read the other day his stuff from the early Russiagate period of RFK Jr.'s scribbles back in 2018. He was off the wall talking about Russiagate, how Russia had cheated America out of Hillary Clinton's presidency and so on. Absolutely atrocious stuff. I prefer his more recent work. His more recent work is pretty impressive. If elected, he's going to end the war in Ukraine. If elected, he's going to pardon Julian Assange and Edward Snowden. If elected, he's going to open the books, I hope, on the murder of his own father and the books on the murder of his own uncle, but all the other books, for sure, the books about the criminal conspiracy that existed between the United States deep state and the big tech oligarchs of Facebook and Twitter, as was, and no doubt many others. The criminal nexus in defiance of the US Constitution itself, which existed to conspire to deny the people of America their First Amendment rights, and much, much more. I think that RFK Jr., if the Democratic Party had any sense, would be an answer to their problems. But if not, then it's becoming obvious that RFK Jr. is going to have to make a third-party run, the very thing that Bernie Sanders could and should have done when the Democratic Party cheated him. And last, and definitely least, my own country of Britain, which I haven't seen for quite some time, is in the grip of coronation mania. People are lighting up public buildings. People are preparing street parties, no, not that many, not as many as there once would have been, in order to watch Queen Camilla. I'm not making that up. That's what we've got to call her from now on. Queen Camilla and King Charles III crowned with stolen jewels in a ceremony costing £250 million on a manifesto of a slimmed down monarchy. The country is gripped with whether Harry and Meghan are going to show up and how long they're going to stay. And it all sums up the faded grandeur, not just of the British royals, but of Great Britain itself. We'll be talking to the Member of Parliament who did more to expose the malfeasance in the royal household than any other. The Right Honourable Norman Baker will be one of our guests tonight. Because I have no clock, I have no idea how long I have spoken. I pray it was not too long, and I pray that you heard each and every word of it. In which case, give me 60 seconds, and I'll be right back with the rest of the show.
You know, and it's a very, thank you for, you know, I'm a big fan of your show, Gigi. Great debate, great. And I'm Scottish. I'm very passionate about what's happening there, you know. I had a great mom. She was Scottish, Mary McLeod. She taught me well. She taught me well at everything, including golf. I love Scotland, and I love the Scottish food. It's great food. I said to Melania, you know, haggis. Look at that. What's more Scottish than that? Me. I am that haggis. She said, what, thin-skinned and full of crap?
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Let's start with unquestionably the biggest story of the night, or any night, the attack on the Kremlin last night. Because let's face it, this actually could contain the seeds of an explosion that will wipe everything else away, including thee and me. It will not matter what tin pot king is sitting on the throne of Britain if Britain no longer exists. It will not matter if RFKjr or Kamala Harris is president of the United States if the United States is a heap of radioactive ash. Let's go to Russia, to Mike Jones, an Englishman abroad, a former military man, now a journalist and broadcaster, and an analyst of great acuity. He lives in St. Petersburg, which is not Moscow, but I'm sure that he has taken the temperature of the public opinion in Russia over the last 12 hours or so. He is Mike Jones, a very popular guest on the mother of all talk shows, and I'm glad to welcome him again this evening. Mike, pretty dramatic events. Tell us how it was for you. Did the earth move at the same time as it moved for the rest of us? When did you learn of what had happened, and what are people saying?
Thanks again for having me, Mr. Galloway. I'll correct the record. I'm actually in Moscow. That's
Okay.
where I was today. I've moved there now from St. Petersburg. So
Even
yeah, I was in
better.
the thick of it today. Yeah, I was in the thick of it today, and I was at the Red Square not long ago, where you'll note the 9th of March Victory Day parade preparations are already there. They featured in the footage of this drone strike today. I learned of this event around afternoon when it was reported. And the attack itself, I won't go into too many details. I'm sure the viewers are aware of many of the sort of basics there. Really quite amateurish by the looks of it. There were some conflicting words used in the news reports that I've reported on, where they say how the drone was disabled. People are believing that what was disabled was the guidance system as opposed to the explosives, because there was quite clearly an explosion. If this was an attempt on President Putin's life, as the Russian media is sort of claiming, well, it was pretty sloppy. It's not a surprise that Kiev has denied any responsibility for this, but it's not likely, really, in many people's view, that this could be a false flag attack. That's been another theory that certainly people have commented on, that this is being used as some form of justification by Russia. I don't really give that theory too much credence, given the fact that one of the measures taken by the government in Moscow was to ban any and all use of drones. So I believe the Russians have enough evidence to believe that this drone took off in Russian territory, very close to the Kremlin, was likely piloted by saboteurs, or at least set on its course by SBU operatives. I think that's the official theory. What's more concerning for me than anything else is now the almost violent rhetoric that's coming out of pretty prominent voices. We have Vyacheslav Volodin, who is one of the State Duma representatives. He is now calling Kiev a terrorist state, pretty much asking for the gloves to come off now. And of course, right up there, as always, Dmitry Medvedev, who even is going so far as to call for the removal of Zelensky. He's saying how Hitler was not required to sign the surrender of Nazi Germany, so why should Zelensky be preserved? There's then commentary that this breaches an almost unspoken agreement between Moscow and the West, because remember, we're dealing with the West, not just with Ukraine here, about not attacking political leaders. We know this story from the Israeli ambassador when he visited Zelensky and assured Zelensky that he was not under threat, despite the air raid sirens that went off theatrically for Joe Biden. So it's always been a kind of unwritten rule that certainly Zelensky wouldn't be targeted. With this attack, which is believed to target Putin, there's now calls for the gloves to come off. And I have seen a notification this evening that Kiev, among 9 other regions, have now sounded an air raid alert.
Yes, of course, there are air raids alerts very regularly. There's a lot of air raids. The question is, what are the targets? Because Russia has not attacked the vital state organs of the Kiev government. Still less have they attacked the President Zelensky. And as you rightly say, the former Prime Minister of Israel assured Zelensky that Putin had assured him that Zelensky's life was not at risk. Although, of course, things can happen by accident. It ain't no accident when you land 2 drones on top of the Kremlin. Let me play devil's advocate with you. There's not much doubt that it was a terrorist act if it was launched inside Russian territory, as you more or less confirm it must have been, by saboteurs, and it landed on the rooftop twice of the heart of Russian government. That's a terrorist attack, and the state that sponsored it can quite obviously be described as a terrorist state. Ditto, what else but an assassination attempt can it be if you land 2 explosive drones on the roof of the building in which, at least nominally, Vladimir Putin lives and works? Now, we're told that they would say that anyway, that Putin wasn't in the building, that he works and presumably lives somewhere else, but the person who launched the attack could not know that. I mean, you could, if you launched an attack on the Lincoln bedroom and Joe Biden was sleeping in another bedroom, he wouldn't be able to claim it wasn't a terrorist attack, it wasn't an assassination attempt, because I wasn't in that bedroom. It would be quite obviously an assassination attempt. So if you've got a terrorist attempt by a neighboring state to assassinate your leader, what else but taking the gloves off could Russia possibly do?
There's the other idea that this is a sort of symbolic attack, but yeah, I believe the intentions are pretty clear here of what was meant to be achieved. This is actually an embarrassment for the Russian authorities. Russian television has been fairly tight-lipped. They haven't, from what I'm told, given it too much coverage, which is quite understandable because it doesn't matter how you cut it. This is a strike, as you've said, deep in the heart of the Russian Federation, almost trying to cut the head off the government there. So it's still a bit of a failing that this even occurred at all in regards to the Russian authorities. And you're right, like I say, this rhetoric now coming out of taking the gloves off there was even talk of threats up into nuclear weapons. We've already had some talk, of Belarus hosting these nuclear weapons on behalf of the Russian Federation. We have had similar talk before, and especially we saw it with General Surovikin when he unleashed a wave of missiles against Ukraine and Kiev in particular, cutting the power. I'm not sure really. I'm quite concerned really as to what options we have left. Defense Minister Shoigu warned about this. He said we're going up the ratchet in the steps, but there aren't many steps left. And he's trying to really ram that message home to the West. We've already had it said before, you're playing with fire. This really is quite a reckless and irresponsible attack by the Kiev regime. And whilst they've denied it, I've already seen designs of postage stamps to commemorate this event that they also claim they had nothing to do with, which seems rather odd to me.
They did the same with the Kerch Bridge, of course. They said that the Russians had blown up the Kerch Bridge themselves, but they made a postage stamp of the explosion anyway. They, of course, helped to spread the lie that Russia had blown up the Nord Stream. And now they're implying that something, I'll go further than you, deeply embarrassing for Russia that this happened. That's why I said earlier, in former times, trust me, I knew those times very well. The military people in charge of the security over Moscow would already have been shot dead in the Lubyanka because this is a gigantic embarrassment for Russia. And I've no doubt that's why the TV is playing it down, because it's a national embarrassment. I could go further, but I don't want to rub it in. It is therefore likely, any way you dice it, it has to mean further escalation, Mike, doesn't it?
It does. We've now having these talks of the beginning of this much vaunted Ukrainian counteroffensive, and I believe perhaps even that's part of it. This may even be a signal to the elements of the SBU that things are kicking off. Prigozhin today has warned that the active phase of the Ukrainian counteroffensive is due to begin. Zelensky himself in Finland today also hinted about it, whereas he was banging his begging bowl for F-16 fighters. He was talking about this counteroffensive coming on. So I think maybe Russia has launched some preemptive strikes to try and keep this counteroffensive, if it ever does take place, at bay. Whether we now see the mobilized troops that we've not yet heard from for a long time activated, possibly even coming down from Belarus, as Kiev has feared and the West has feared for a long time. We don't know. Unfortunately, it's all speculation at this point. But the one thing I will say that kind of reassures me is that Russia has always been patient, calm, and calculated, and not emotional and not reactionary in a knee-jerk fashion. They have often launched retaliatory strikes, and the Ministry of Defense has stated as such, but usually they're not knocked out of their plan. Shoigu as well has often stated this, that they won't be keeping to any schedule of anyone else but their own, and they will achieve their objectives in their time. Whether they have to do something political to placate the people, like Medvedev, like State Duma Representative Volodin, to try and give them some reassurance as well that there is an answer for this, we shall see in the coming days, I'm sure.
Yeah, trust in the process, as people used to tell me about Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's disastrous period as manager of Manchester United, but I digress. What's going to happen with the military parade? Just for the international viewers, this is arguably the highlight of Russian public life. It is in commemoration of the world historic role of the Red Army, the USSR, Russia as the successor state, its role in defeating Hitler fascism, liberating Berlin from the jackboot of Nazism, which killed the best part of 100 million people around the world, including many millions of people in Europe. If not for Russia, that kind of regime might well still be in power in Germany and throughout Europe, and by extension throughout the world. So a pretty big deal. It's the victory parade. Will it go ahead? And will President Putin be there?
I believe it will go ahead. As you say, it's kind of a linchpin of the society. The only thing that has been cut back on is this really wonderful tradition of the March of the Immortal Regiment, which perhaps people in the West aren't as aware of, where people take pictures of their fallen ancestors who gave their lives for us in the Great Patriotic War, and they commemorate them. Usually this is a physical march through the streets, but in some regions such as Belgrade and Bryansk that have suffered attacks recently, these have now been shifted, as they were in the pandemic, to online fashion, where people can upload pictures of their relatives that they lost in the war. So that is one concession given current events, but I don't believe that the Russians could get away with stopping Victory Day. Ideally, it will be also mixed with the capture of Artyomovsk, Bakhmut, but again, I wouldn't see Prigozhin costing lives just for a symbolic win for Victory Day. And I know the West is doing everything they can to deny Russia that inevitable victory there. But yeah, the 9th of May is a huge deal, and people are very much looking forward to it. And I myself hope to be in the Four Seasons Hotel to watch it take place.
Now, you mentioned Mr. Medvedev. He's been the prime minister. He's been the president. Who knows? He might be the prime minister, president again. He's still a very powerful figure in the National Security Council. When I knew him before, I would have characterized him as, how shall I put it in a way that isn't insulting? A mouse. But he's now a lion. He's now the man who makes the strongest statements, ferocious statements, like the one today to which you alluded. Has he, as it were, experienced a road to Damascus conversion, or is he playing the outrider? Does he have elections in mind? What's your informed speculation about that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. He's kind of undergone this transition or transformation whereby he was more of an advocate for dealing with the West before, quite liberal in his views. And then suddenly one of the most bellicose commentators on events, really saber rattling, often trolling as well, as he did, had a bit of banter with Elon Musk, Comrade Musk, as he called him. I even read an article the other day talking about how much President Putin has done for Russia. And it even claimed that Medvedev was given the thankless task of playing this role as the sort of appeaser of the West to buy time for Russia, to make it look to the West like there was an advocate for them, there was a friend of the West inside Russia. Quite how true that is, I don't know, but possibly with he's quite a cunning man. People have to understand he's incredibly intelligent. He's a lawyer, like Putin, actually, by education, and he's very careful with his words and mindful of them. And like we've seen with Sergei Lavrov as well, these are razor sharp minds. So I wouldn't say that. I would be guessing, but I do wonder actually if that is the case, where they've used kind of this smoke and mirrors and deception for this point in time, which was invariably going to come.
Soft cop routine, yeah?
Yeah. I can actually entertain that idea.
Now, Oliver Stone, the great Hollywood film director, responsible for some of the greatest movies of our time, has a new one coming out on the nuclear question. And in the course of promoting it, he made the point, I think yesterday, I read it today, that Putin is a great leader whose people love him. Now, you've been on the ground in St. Petersburg and now in Moscow. His achievements cannot be gainsaid in terms of the transformation of the Russian economy, Russian prestige, and so on over the last 20 years, and the modernization of the Russian military. But do the people love him, in your opinion?
Yeah, of course, this is split across demographics. I think the most people that truly appreciate all the changes are, of course, those who were born in the Soviet Union, who suffered the pains of the collapse and have seen just how far the country has come, well, since being on its knees, being raped by Yeltsin and Clinton and all this, and the people suffered for that. Those people, I believe, do truly value. It's the younger generation, of course, who aren't quite as appreciative of all the wonderful systems that they have, the roads, the infrastructure, the healthcare system, that even by comparison to the NHS, I'm in awe of. Especially even the private healthcare, and its commensurably low cost, even to the UK. So there's a lot for Russians to be proud of, and even on in the population, where Russia had a terrible, I think it was deficit of like 1.5 million population decline, has now been reduced down to tens of thousands thanks to these social programs and financial support for the family. So it's mainly the older generation who value it, and the younger ones, they're coming around, I believe, now with recent events in the West showing its true colors.
Yeah, well, youth is wasted on the young. I've always thought that. Last question, Mike. Going to bed soon. Are people nervous about what might happen during the night? Are people fearful after this attack on the Kremlin?
No, I don't believe so. This is going to put a lot of pressure on President Putin. He's already had his critics. He's already had people like we've seen with Medvedev, who want to get it done and get it done now. A lot of impatience. They think Russia should have been much harder, faster, stronger from the offset. None of this goodwill gesture falling back from Kiev. It should have all been very much over and done with, for the sake of the people of Donbass, who have gone through enough at the hands of these criminals already. So I am going to be paying a lot of attention to Putin in the coming days, and maybe even his spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, to see perhaps what is said and how they maneuver now politically, because it is going to create a lot of pressure and a lot of anger from people, politically, pride-wise, as we approach Victory Day.
Mike Jones, as always, a pleasure to receive your wisdom. Stay safe and come back on the show soon. Mike Jones, formerly of St. Petersburg, now of Moscow, a journalist and English expat living and working in Russia. I'll be right back with the Right Honourable Norman Baker on the British royal family. Stay tuned. As I say, how lucky we are to have the audience that we do. 1 million people every week watching all or part of the mother of all talk shows, and most attentive to what they hear, and many of them truly brilliant students. It's quite humbling, actually.
Oh, George, blessings upon your cranium. It's the metamorphosis, man, or metamorphosis, the intimations of immortality experiences. George, I like what you said. I love a lot of things you're saying. You know, your daily communion with God is through your conscience. I wanted to comment on that. That's beautifully said.
Your Socratic method on the on-air university is very beneficial, and I can only speak personally. I have appreciated, because I had called last time in regard to the general strike, and you helped to really refine my understanding of that from a different point.
The alternative point of view. When I heard that last week, and again today, I had this kind of visceral gut reaction to it. And I know what you mean by that. And, you know, the MOATS audience knows what they mean by that, because we're all informed citizens. We wouldn't be here if we weren't. For the masses who don't necessarily follow geopolitics, let's say, they're going to listen to whatever the mainstream media tells them. And for them, anything that's alternative, the automatic kind of reaction is, oh, okay, it's a crackpot view, it's a conspiracy theory, it's an extreme view, when really it's not. Let's call it what it is. It's fact-based commentary.
Hello, George. Nice to talk to you. By the way, you deserve every penny you get, because you're the only person who speaks the truth over all the fake news.
I wanted to personally thank you for bringing such great guests that speak about the situation. Also, I have become more aware of people like Max Blumenthal at the Gray Zone and others who do update us with the correct information about Syria, and this has just been such a great eye-opener. So thank you.
You are the people who have stuck with this show and transformed it into a truly global university, where it can be said that every month at least 4 million people will watch this show. They're in Greece, they're in Canada, they're in America, they're in England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, they're in New Zealand, they're in Australia, they're in Norway, Denmark, Sweden, they're in Finland. They're all over the world. They're in Africa with a call from Nigeria. This is a truly global phenomenon, and that is down to you.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, here are the telephone numbers if you want to respond to anything that's been said or should have been, in your opinion. If you're in the UK and Ireland, entirely free of charge, remember, it's 08081965522. That's 08081965522. If you're in the US or Canada, it is again toll free, +1 844 944 3344. +1 844 944 3344. And if you're in the rest of the world, which is, of course, most of you, though a lot of people seem to forget that, it is +44 203 966 2625. That's +44 203 966 2625. Now, we've got a poll running. Did Ukraine try to kill Putin? In my view, you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to work that out, but apparently it is an issue. Was it a false flag? Was it symbolic? Was it a firework? Or was it an assassination attempt? Well, you already know my point of view. It definitely was an assassination attempt, but you can give your view on our poll. Did Ukraine try to kill Putin? You can vote on my Twitter feed, on YouTube right now if you're watching the show on YouTube, and if you are, please do donate on the super chat mechanism. You can do it on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway, or on the YouTube community poll, which traditionally outpolls all the other portals. At the moment, 44% think that the Ukraine tried to kill Putin, but 56% think not. That's a fascinating answer that I never expected. Now, one of my esteemed former parliamentary colleagues is Norman Baker. I was never in the same party as him and never on the same political page as him, but I always respected him, not least because of the role that he played in the run-up to the Iraq War, which changed, of course, the course of British political history, including my own political history, and to some extent, maybe even his. He wrote a very important book on the strange death of Dr. David Kelly, on which I based my film, Killing Kelly, which many people have been kind enough to say was a critical success, at least. But he also wrote another stonking book, which I very much enjoyed, on the British royal family. Now, the significance of him being right honourable is that while I was only honourable, he was right honourable. That means he is a privy councillor. That means the late Queen had an obligation and the right to consult him on great issues of the day. And the new king has the same privy council and the same obligations. So whether or not he ever takes their advice, I have my doubts. And whether within the privy council he'd take the advice of the man who is exposed so much about the royal finances and how they work. As Norman Baker, I have even greater doubt, but I'm very glad to say that he is now on the show. The Right Honourable Norman Baker. Welcome to the mother of all talk shows. Norman, it's been some time. So much royal news since we last spoke. You looking forward to the coronation?
It's not my cup of tea, George, particularly, I have to say that. I shan't be out there waving flags, no.
Well, as a member of the Privy Council, I thought you had a front row seat. Aren't you going?
No, I shall be undertaking various media duties to make sure that the whole cat and caboodle is put into perspective and people are aware of how much it's costing. You know, we were told by Charles we wanted to slim down monarchy, and yet this particular one, this coronation, is going to cost £250 million. That's 5 times more in real terms, 5 times more than Queen Elizabeth's one cost, which was £47 million in 1953 prices. But here's something else, George. I don't know if you know this. I only found out myself about a fortnight ago. There are about 9 European monarchies left. I mean, most of them have gone, of course. But the ones that are left, nobody else had a coronation apart from us. The Spanish coronation, the last one, was 1555.
Well, I didn't know that, and it is indeed the paradox that I wanted to start off talking with you about tonight. What is slimmed down about this jamboree? It is super fat. It is super obese. It is Big Mac, McDonald, gas guzzling, Coca-Cola guzzling, super fat monarchy that we're going to be looking at on Saturday, isn't it?
Absolutely. All the paraphernalia, the Disney World will be there. The golden coaches, the castles, the fake princesses, they're all there. The Disney experience for the Americans will be there. It's a PR puff for the royal family. Let's be quite clear about that. That's what it's about. It's about boosting their image. And actually, I think it's a mistake because the image they're going to present is one of a ruritarian monarchy, which is now way out of touch with the population at large. And the opinion polls, which aren't reflected on the BBC, by the way, I have to say, the opinion polls showing 9% of the population care a great deal about this event, and 2/3 of the population either don't care at all or don't care very much. We don't hear that. We don't hear, for example, that 14% of the population only think Camilla should have. I haven't heard that one either. So the media has booked its slots, it's booked its reporters, it's sorted out the whole thing way in advance, months in advance, and it's incapable of responding to the public mood, which is different to what they think it is.
I feel sure, and in fact gratified to hear you put numbers on it, but I would have felt sure of the general direction of public opinion as you've just described it. Let's go to Queen Camilla. You and I both sat in Parliament when we were repeatedly counselled, we were repeatedly assured that she would not be the Queen. She'd be the Queen consort. And now she's the Queen. And not only that, she has announced that she's going to wear the late Queen Anne's crown because she didn't want to go to all the trouble of making a new one. So she's going to be using a second-hand crown. Will that save her blushes? Because I reckon she's even more unpopular than the king.
Well, I think she is. And I also think, actually, it's not that I particularly care about family relations, but I think it's discourteous to William and Harry, to be honest with you, for her to take that title of Queen. And actually, George, you remember, it wasn't just Queen consort. Go back a couple of years before that, she was going to be called the Duchess of Cornwall and stick with that. That's what she was going to be.
You're right, I'd forgotten that. I mean, great efforts were made. I remember your now political colleague, but then my political colleague, Andrew McKinley MP, now a Liberal Democrat councillor. I remember he put relentless pressure on the government on this question, and they were never done with their assurances not to worry that this woman who'd driven Diana mad and possibly indirectly to her death, who had been an adulterer herself, having an adulterous affair with Prince Charles, who nobody cared for, not to worry. She would not have any real position in the Constitution. But now she does. How did that happen? Why was Parliament silent on that?
Well, Parliament just, the government of the day, whichever party it is, just does what the royals want, and it has done for centuries. And whenever the royals come cap in hand and say we need more money, they get more money. When they say we want to have this particular title, they get that particular title. That's how it is. I mean, I think, to be honest with you, in my head, Camilla is not queen, she's a mistress royal.
That would be, at least, had the benefit of being the truth. And of course, all these kings had mistresses, and that's a matter of historical fact. But they never tried to make them the queen.
No, they didn't. But I mean, I think Charles, of course, is obsessed by her. I don't quite know why. I mean, we all have our individual tastes, I suppose. But I have to say, Diana was rather a better character in my view than Camilla. But hey, that's up to Charles. However, we know that he was obsessed by her. We know he was carrying on an affair as he was leading Diana up the aisle and up the garden path at the same time. We know he wanted to be her tampon. I mean, this is the man who is now king.
It's a shabby state of affairs, isn't it, Norman? And it makes the country look shabby. And maybe the country is shabby, and therefore that's what we deserve.
Well, I think we are, I mean, in a way. And I think also that, you know, as always, as with David Kelly, as with the royal finances, as with this, the media lets us down. They don't do their job properly. They just kowtow and go along with whatever they're told to go along with. I mean, the media in this country is quite shocking. And the more I've been an MP, the more I've been looking into matters, the more disgraceful the media appears to me to be. They should be exposing these matters, but we haven't heard a whisper of it. It's the first time I've been able to be on air and talk about these things properly. You know, I go on here and talk about the royal finances and let me on for a minute or two, then shut me up. But this is, you know, these matters ought to be discussed. And given the opinion poll that only 14% want Camilla to be queen, this is after a barrage of public relations over many years, trying to persuade us otherwise. It hasn't worked.
When's the next meeting of the Privy Council?
Well, I don't know. I mean, we don't have any votes, of course. I mean, I went to the Accession Council when Charles became king, so the week after his mother. And by the way, while we had the coronation 6 months on, if you believe in all this mystique, which the royal family is supposed to do, the anointing of oil and all that, if you believe in all that, that should take place immediately after the Queen dies, not 6 months later. You know, so anyway, I went to the Accession Council, George, which was the one which took place immediately after the Queen's death, which is when he actually became king. It was kind of chaired by Liz Truss, God help us, who was a prime minister at the time. All the other prime ministers were there. It was quite an interesting experience, I have to say. You'd have enjoyed it. The best comment, I think, came at the end from the Deputy Speaker, Nigel Evans, who said to me when we were winding out, he said, now we go out through the gift shop. But that was kind of how it was.
Norman, I know you're going to be very busy as a royal expert over these next few days. I hope it leads to a second career for you and it goes well. Thank you very much for joining us on the mother of all talk shows on the eve of the coronation of King Charles III. Let me take a break, and after which I'll be talking to the one and only Laurie Spencer. Stay tuned.
I always have been and always will be firmly opposed to any changes in the law to allow assisted dying or assisted suicide. I believe the threat to the dependent, the most vulnerable, the most desperate in our society is simply too great, and therefore assisted dying or legalized assisted suicide must never become law in this country. Thank you, George. Thank you very much.
Bravo. I agree entirely, and spoke, I hope, powerfully in Parliament against this euthanasia, legalized murder. I have the most profound feelings of opposition to it, which, as you say, does not mean that the pressures on people who are terminally ill, who have lost hope, are not themselves profound, and that the pressures on people without pay and without any kind of remittance or relief are condemned to years, decades of caring for people who are terminally ill, helpless, hopeless, and so on, that these are not deep, deep mines of anguish and of pain and of doubt. But I have a moral and religious obligation to oppose it. If capitalism was a person and it could kill anyone that it liked, it would kill the one that will never again turn a penny of profit. It's very easy to imagine relatives, even family members, even husbands and wives that would like to see the back of you, either because they think you've suffered long enough or because they'd quite like to see what's in your will and quite like to spend it. I wouldn't trust, and I don't think you should, anybody to decide whether you live or die. As a religious believer, I believe that that is God's job, not yours. This is a subject we'll have to return.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Did Ukraine try to kill Putin? Is the Pope a Catholic? Do bears defecate in the woods? Well, it doesn't look like. Most of the people responding, although this is, I think, only the Twitter section of the poll, only 44% think that Ukraine tried to kill Putin. 56% think they did not. It'd be interesting to see, as I cannot at this point, what the people in the other parts of the poll thought. Now, can I tell you about Super Chat? They're absolutely vital. We need your Super Chat if we're going to keep the midweek MOATS on a Wednesday going. So if you value it, and actually the audience on a Sunday and a Wednesday is now more or less identical, between the two of them, in the last 7 days, 1.3 million people watched the mother of all talk shows, in part or in whole, across both these shows. That's a phenomenal audience, and I'd hate to lose the Wednesday show. But I'm going to lose it unless I get a sponsor or I get enough support from you, the viewers. So please, if you are on YouTube, or if you can go onto YouTube, go to the Super Chat mechanism. It's really simple. Even a technological idiot like me can do it. And you get to leave a comment, and I read it out, like this one from Tom McElvogue, who sent 10 Australian dollars. Thank you, Tom. Hi, Gigi. The best time for Albo to negotiate for Assange was when the billions were on the table in the AUKUS deal. But I don't think, says Tom, he has the courage to do it. Thanks, Tom, for that. I think you're right. Nasri Aki CA sends 20 American dollars. The West would have argued, I now can't read these because of this clock. Let me try and get rid of this clock. The West would have argued, no, I can't, I'm sorry. So US dollars 49.99. Question from, what do you think about Bobby joining forces with the People's Party as an independent? Well, I think it would be a good idea. I know why he's trying to get the Democratic Party nomination. That'll give him tons of publicity, however much they try to keep him out. As long as, if he's cheated, as he will be, he then decides he's not going to back Joe Biden. And at that point, I would have thought all of us should back him, including the People's Party. Line one, our old friend Fra, a legend actually of the show over many years in Belfast. He wants to talk about the attack on the Kremlin. Go ahead, Fra.
Hiya, George. Thank you very much for taking my call. I must say, I really enjoyed the contribution from Mike Jones. I thought he was excellent. I thought his analysis was 100%. George, I'm phoning up because, kind of my take on what's happened would be that I believe that the attack on the Kremlin isn't an isolated terrorist attack. I believe, as many people do, that nearly every attack by the Ukrainian armed forces is directed, financed, armed by NATO and the US. So I believe that all those parties played a part in the attack upon the Kremlin, and the fact that Zelensky was hiding in Finland, knowing what the possible reaction would be to the attack, speaks volumes in itself. I'm not sure their intelligence was that good. I'm not sure that President Putin was in the Kremlin or even in Moscow when the attack took place. And I believe as maybe 56% of your poll have shown that this could be partially symbolic. They might have hoped to have caught Putin, but regardless of that, the very fact that they attacked the seat of democracy in Russia, they attacked the Kremlin, all as a precursor to their supposed summer-spring offensive. I think that that is a morale booster for the Ukrainian armed forces going forward in Bakhmut and Zaporozhye and along the contact line. And, you know, I read reports that these could be wrong, that there are up to 450,000 Ukrainian armed soldiers still at large in Western Ukraine. That's a huge force that may be brought forward for the counter-offensive. So I believe NATO's behind the attack. Zelensky's hiding in Finland because he doesn't want to be the target of any retaliation. But I think that man is almost like a dead man walking. I don't think the Russians, I don't think the military, I don't think the civilians in Russia, and I don't think Putin will ever forgive him for this transgression of trying to murder the elected, democratically elected leader of the Russian people.
Okay, Fra, a powerful call, a powerful perspective. Let's go to Mick in Notting Hill to hear his views on the coronation. Go ahead, Mick.
Well, hi, George. How are you?
All good by the grace of God. What would you like to say?
Yeah, well, I definitely agree with your last caller. 100% about that. But as for the coronation, George, I mean, someone else said earlier about the statistics, like, oh, under 25s, they don't like him and blah, blah. No one likes that fella. He's just not a liked bloke. And I guess, you know, the best thing he could have done to get any respect for him and his brother and the shenanigans they got on with, or his brother especially, you know, he should have just given it to the young ones. Everyone says it, Kate and William. They'd look better on a pound night, you know, on a pound note. I mean...
Although I take the Bob Crow line. I don't care what's on the pound, whether it's the Queen's face or the Queen's arse, as long as my members get enough of them. I'm not really that worried about who's on the banknote. But I think you're right, Mick, that the monarchy would have been in far more stable situation. But Charles has been obsessed by being the king. That's one of the things that has driven him mad, and I think he is mad. I honestly, I know it's a big thing to say, but he's mad, King Charles, for me. Anybody that preferred Camilla over Diana has to be mad. But there's 1,000 other pieces of evidence that he's mad. And he has obsessed over being the king, and he's blowing £250 million on the placing of a crown on the head of a man well into his 70s now. It's another sign of madness. He would have been far better abdicating and giving it to William, although whether William will be any better, of course, we don't know that yet. That's the big risk with hereditary monarchies, Mick.
Yeah, but at least they'd look better on a pound note, Kate and William, than the two adulterers. What would we call them apart from that? I mean, there's a lot of swear words we could say, but yeah, the two adulterers, King and Queen. But there's one thing I've been getting lots of pictures of in the last day or two, and it's like pictures of like a coronation plate, George. I'm sure, I don't know if you've seen it, but it'll make you laugh. No. But it definitely makes you giggle, for sure. It's basically a picture of King Charles, and Queen Camilla, but Camilla looks strikingly like Jimmy Savile.
we better not go any further down that road. Mick, thanks for a hilarious call and a trip down memory lane. And God rest the soul of my dear friend Bob Crow. Marwan is in Manchester wants to talk about the Kremlin attack. Go ahead, Marwan.
Hi, good evening, George. George, just wanted to get your thoughts. So obviously the attack at the Kremlin today, and you kind of touched on that earlier in your show. So I just wanted to get your thoughts. Is given that Zelensky, it is generally accepted that he's a puppet of the US who was placed there by the US government or the deep state. Was this, in your opinion, potentially a attack that was ordered by Zelensky himself, or has the US or / deep state come to the point where they have come to the realization that using Ukraine as a front in this proxy war against Russia, that war has been lost, and we need to kind of make Zelensky disappear, and therefore it is in fact the US who potentially launched this attack on the Kremlin as an excuse to cover up and make Zelensky disappear?
Well, that would be a very convoluted conspiracy, which doesn't mean it's not true, but it does mean that I've got no evidence that would allow me to comment either way, Marwan. What I would say, though, different to your perspective, is that actually Zelensky was elected on a peace ticket. He was not put there by the United States. He was elected with a landslide vote because he promised to honor the Minsk agreements and make peace with Russia. How's that for a betrayal of your electoral mandate? Secondly, and I used the words carefully earlier on, I'll use them again carefully. I believe Ukraine no longer has any agency in this conflict at all. They make no decision in this conflict at all. Whether to have an offensive, when to have an offensive, whether to send terrorist groups into Russia to blow people up in restaurants or to land drones on the Kremlin. None of these are Ukrainian decisions. They're not necessarily made in the White House, in the Oval Office, but they're made by American agents of one level or another. They're made by the Pentagon, they're made by the CIA, they're made by the State Department, they're made by, who knows, Hunter Biden, they're made by the big guy, sometimes the big decisions, though whether the big guy even knows what he's deciding is, of course, a moot point. Or they're made by so-called mercenaries who are really special forces that have been sent in the guise of mercenaries from one or many of the NATO powers. I don't believe that any of the important decisions now being made in this conflict, including the one last night, to launch this attack on the Kremlin last night, or to blow up a blogger in a St. Petersburg restaurant, or to murder the daughter of a prominent Russian philosopher, Mr. Dugin, and his poor daughter, who was cruelly murdered in a cold-blooded terrorist attack in Moscow. None of these decisions are made by Ukrainians. There may be Ukrainians in the team, in the party, but the final say is with the United States and with the UK increasingly. There's NATO and there's the UK-US. The UK-US is the head of the snake. There's absolutely no doubt. A snake has a forked tongue, and the UK-US are the two forks of that tongue. While I'm at it, I see that NATO has opened an office in Japan. That's the Japan that the United States devastated with not one, but 2 nuclear weapons. There's now a NATO flag flying in Japan. What could possibly go wrong? Let's talk to Tater, who is in China, I think, wants to talk about democracy. Tater, welcome. I'm afraid I can't hear this call. I don't know if anyone else can. You must put the YouTube volume down.
Hello?
Yes, hello.
Hi, George.
Yes, what would you like to say?
I'm calling. What prompted my call was what happened in France, about Macron trying to pass that new law about the retirement age. And, people been calling him dictator because, he want to pass that law. But I want to talk about is democracy really doesn't work in the Western sense of having, everything being voted for, because I think to a lot of people are, basically selfish. So for any law to pass that will take away some of their so-called freedom, it's not good, for them. So how should I say it? So they call him a dictator. So, but I think for Macron to pass a law that will pretty much tank his next election, tank his vote, take guts to do it. What do you think?
No, I take the absolutely opposite point of view. What Macron is doing is spitting in the face of the people of France who elected him not because they liked him, but because they disliked him less than they disliked the candidate Le Pen, who was the last candidate in the ballot alongside him. If my friend, Mr. Mélenchon, had been in the final ballot, as he was 2.5% of the vote away from being, then Mélenchon would be the president now. And what's happening in France would not be happening. The second point that I would make is that actually these protests only have the retirement age issue as their proximate cause. There are many, many other causes that are now coalescing in a critical mass of opposition against President Macron. For example, but of course the media never reports any of these other issues. They want people to think, and I'm surprised that you, all the way in China, have been fooled by this, that this is all about, young people of 19 and 20 are risking death at the hands of the French police over an increase in the retirement age 40 years on for them. Is ridiculous if you think about it for 2 minutes. They never tell you that one of the principal demands of these great mass demonstrations is an end to French involvement in the war in Ukraine. 73% of, that's almost 3 out of 4, almost 3/4 of the French people, when polled, want an end to France's involvement in the NATO aggression in Ukraine. One of the principal demands is to do as General de Gaulle did, withdraw France from at least the political committee of NATO. Many, many millions want to withdraw from NATO altogether. There are many people on the streets of France because they want France out of the European Union. They want Frexit. There are others who want a different social and economic system altogether. Maybe some of them want a system like yours in China, so you should not disrespect them by calling them selfish. What's selfish about wanting a wage increase that at least keeps pace with the inflation which your government has brought on the people itself? The reason supermarket prices in Germany are 17% increase is because of the German government. It's not selfish to fight that. Neither is it selfish in France to fight for a wage increase, to fight to defend your pension against a neoliberal dictatorship of finance capital, globalized capital, EU and NATO capital that rules and ruins your life. The people of France are absolutely right to be on the streets. I'm very surprised at someone from China having the perspective that you displayed there. They say that China is a dictatorship. There's people like Tita with views like that on the phone to the mother of all talk shows. Oh, some dictatorship. I'll be right back with Laurie Spencer in just 2 minutes. Stay tuned.
The airwaves. This savannah is a rigid dichotomy of fact and fiction. As Fisher says, the Twitter sphere where the slightest misjudgment can spell being cancelled. One species rules over the airwaves through its ability to adapt and survive in even the harshest environments. The George Galloway. The top cat in these parts, it is mostly active on Sunday evenings in Britain and mid-afternoon in the United States. It seldom roars during the day. Most notable for its wide variety of headdress, it protects these parts from the mainstream media. You can catch this fine specimen on the mother of all talk shows. Don't pick a fight with it. They've been known to bite back.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, don't forget to vote on the poll. Did the Ukraine try to kill Putin? Is the Pope a Catholic? Get voting. Only 41% think they did. 59% think they did not. At least I think that is only on the Twitter part of the poll. It may be different on the other platforms. Now, as you know, I very much depend on my loyal and generous Patreon supporters. I'm asking you to support me on Patreon for less than the price of a cup of tea in a very insalubrious cafe per week. That is $1 a week. If you think I'm worth $1, support me on Patreon, patreon.com/George Galloway. And you can support me on the basic level, or you can become a MOATS legend, which is something to be. It's not a title we give out easily. And so there's two new MOATS legends, Piako and Saira Aslam, on my Patreon. Thank you very much indeed to both of you. Paul MacDonald says the president of Ukraine is a puppet of the demented Joe Biden. Biden is so dangerous, I could imagine him giving the go-ahead to Ukraine. God help us all. Love the show, Gigi. Thanks, Paul. Andy says, I'm not voting on this heavy subject till I've watched your show. Only just heard about it. Barely believable. Mainstream media. You and your guests and the people who call in will give me a much better picture of what's actually going on. My first and only real thought about it is how stupid it is for someone to make an attack on the president of a nuclear-armed country. How very well expressed, Andy. Just think about that. Somebody gave a green light to potentially assassinate the president of a hypersonically, intercontinentally ballistic missile holding country. What could possibly have gone wrong? Theresa Kelly, my very good friend in the United States, a MOATS legend, says one can only imagine the quantity of contracts Ukraine oligarchs and evil empire oligarchs have out on Putin. Oligarch Vladimir Yatsenko offered $500,000 bounty to any weapons maker able to land a drone in Red Square during Moscow's upcoming Victory Day parade. He did. Grey Zone tweeted out the video the other day, hoping lots of folks retweet it. I've got a bounty on my head and a Mars bar in each pocket. Peter Kelly says, bizarrely, when reporting it, the BBC suggested that the Russians would be hugely embarrassed. Surely that's for whoever tried to assassinate a head of state. And Paul Cormican says, I'm surprised the BBC reported it at all. If the attempt had been successful, the BBC News 24 channel would have gone into overdrive celebrating the demise of Putin. That is undoubtedly true. The good news is that absolutely nobody watches BBC News 24. And James Butler says there was an understanding that no political buildings would be targeted on either side. That's why Russia never hit any of the parliament buildings in Kiev, and the Ukrainians didn't hit any in the breakaway regions. So it seems strange that this has changed. Either the Americans stirring up trouble or even a Russian red flag. Thank you very much for that. I think that Laurie Spencer is now available. I'm hoping very much so. Laurie Spencer is the independent journalist, author, and radio personality, and a good friend of the show. Welcome, Laurie, back to the mother of all talk shows. It's been too long. Just before we go on to our mutual interest in the candidature of Robert Kennedy, let me ask you how this attack on the Kremlin is playing in the United States. Is it getting any coverage? Is it getting any traction? Anybody going, oh my goodness, there'll be trouble now? Or is it just another news event that has flashed by?
Honestly, the silence is deafening. I mean, the people are paying attention. I got a very rude awakening this morning when I saw the fire over the Kremlin. But from our government, strangely silent.
It's very odd, really, isn't it? Because this could, if this had succeeded, God forbid, if Putin had been killed in this attack, what do they think would have been the Russian reaction to
what do you
the
think's going to happen
decapitation of their country? They think he would have been replaced by a liberal throwing sweets at them, or that he would have been replaced by someone in a state of patriotic fervor, determined to make this war far worse than it already is.
And to do this so close to Victory Day is a strike at the heart of the Russian people, and they know it. And if we, the West, had anything to do with this horror, shame on us. They were our allies in World War II. I would like to remind everybody that we used to be very good friends. We were on the same side. We defeated Nazi Germany together, and we can't even honor them on Victory Day and let them have their day of celebration? It's unconscionable to me, George.
Did Donald Trump say anything about it? I know that Blinken said he absolutely could not confirm it, and other panegyrics like that. But you would have expected Trump, although he's in Scotland rather than the US, to have made a comment. Has he?
I have not heard a comment yet from President Trump or Biden or Robert F. Kennedy Jr. or any other presidential candidate yet. I think they're waiting until we get more information to say something.
Well, let's move on to him, and let's start with a negative. Somebody brought to my attention, no doubt you already knew, but I didn't, some of the atrocious ways in which Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was joining in on the Russiagate hoax when Donald Trump was elected. He several times, I've read them, made completely false statements about Russia's role in defeating Hillary Clinton and thereby electing Donald Trump. Does that make you think twice about the rather full-throated support you've been giving him?
I'm aware of that. I think that was from 2018, back at the height of Russiagate. Unfortunately, yeah, it seems that Kennedy fell for that nonsense, and I can't excuse that, nor will I. But I will say this about my personal knowledge of Kennedy. I've known him for 16 years, as you can see from these pictures, back before he had gray hair. That was a long time ago. I tried to draft this guy. I was involved in a Draft Kennedy campaign back in 2007, George. We were trying to get him to run, after 8 years of Bush. I felt that he was the best man to save America. But the time wasn't right then. His children were still quite young. His wife at the time wasn't supportive. And let's be honest, the momentum of Barack Obama was unstoppable back then. But I'll say this, George. Back then, Bobby was endorsing Hillary Clinton in that race. He's been a longtime friend of Hillary's, endorsed her again in 2016, something I'm not very happy about. But, he's been surrounded all his life by Democratic Party operatives. And he's been most of his life a good Democrat. But I can tell you, and I wish we had time, if you want, I'll give you the short version of Bobby's red pilling. He has awakened to a great many things in recent years. I can tell you 15 years ago, when I tried to discuss the assassination of his uncle with him, he didn't want to talk about it. I tried to get him to look at the evidence about his own father's murder, because I don't believe that Sirhan killed his father. And I brought him mountains of evidence, along with my friend Paul Schrade, who just passed away at the age of 97 last year. You might recall Paul Schrade took a bullet in the kitchen of the Ambassador Hotel to his head and survived. And he spent the rest of his life trying to get to the bottom of what really happened that night. And he reached out to all these various members of the Kennedy family. He reached out to Bobby's widow, Ethel. He reached out to all of their children. And most of the time, Paul got the door slammed on his nose. They didn't want to talk about it. And that's always been kind of a thing in the Kennedy family, especially the RFKs. They don't talk about the tragedies. They always accepted pretty much without question publicly that the Warren Commission was correct, and that Lee Harvey Oswald shot President Kennedy, and that Sirhan killed RFK. But I worked on Bobby for years about this, and finally managed to connect him with Paul Schrade. Once those two began to sit down and talk with one another, and I can tell you Bobby was very resistant to doing so, but once he finally did, and Paul Schrade was a very persuasive man, rest his soul. Bobby just spoke at his memorial service, I think it was last week. So they became dear friends towards the end of Paul's life. And I think that Paul helped to red pill Bobby about a lot of things. Bobby no longer believes a lot of the establishment narratives that he once believed. Now, I can't get inside his head. I'm not in direct contact with him. It's been several years since we spoke last, but I can tell that he's skeptical of our involvement in this war. And I'm not 100% satisfied myself with what I heard in his speech in Boston on April 19th. I understand he's a good diplomat and he's trying to be kind to both sides, because what good does it do in negotiations if you're hostile to one side or the other? I don't really see how we can have peace. And that was always President Kennedy's approach. Even at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, his greatest gift was being able to get into this, get into the head of Nikita Khrushchev. So I understand what he's doing. I understand why he's doing it. And we are in a new Cold War, George. And you know as well as I do, you're not going to get elected dog catcher unless you say mean things about Russia. It's 1955 all over again.
I I mean, I too wish we had time to go more deeply into it. But just before we leave it and move on, I find it, and I have always found it impossible, even before you gave us the benefit of your experience there. If someone had murdered my father, especially on television, when my father was headed for, in one case, and already in the other, high political office, I would devote every waking hour of the rest of my life to exposing the truth about what happened. I have never understood the Kennedy family's reluctance to do that, even in the case of the Sirhan case and your friend Paul's evidence. Only a fool could believe that Sirhan was the genuine murderer of Robert Kennedy. He was shot from the back, as is abundantly clear, whilst Sirhan was never anywhere except standing in front of him.
In front of him. He was standing 3 feet in front of him.
How do you get to the stage where you're slamming the door on the face of a fellow victim of that crime who wants to get to the bottom of it? I genuinely don't understand that. Do you?
No, I didn't either at the time. It puzzled me a great deal. I understand it's painful. I understand it's personal. And there's another reason that we have to take into consideration as well. These conversations that I was having with Kennedy, this was back in 2007, 2008. And at that time, Senator Ted Kennedy was still alive, but he had just been diagnosed with the brain cancer that eventually took his life. As I understand it, it was always Teddy's wish that the family did not discuss any conspiracies related to the murders of John Kennedy or Robert Kennedy. And as long as Teddy was alive, the family respected his wishes. It wasn't until about 2 years after Teddy passed away that Robert Kennedy Jr. became the first of all of the Kennedys to say that he felt that there was, in fact, a conspiracy pointing directly to the CIA in the murder of President Kennedy. Now, it took him a few more years after that to come around on the case of his father and be ready to speak about that. But once he did, he hasn't shut up about it. He wrote a book about it called American Values, which I highly recommend. Great read. He really talks about the Kennedys' long war with the CIA that goes all the way back before President Kennedy's time in the White House. And he's been very vocal about it. He has visited Sirhan in prison. He wrote a letter to the California Parole Board recommending that he be paroled. That was last year, I believe, and the parole board agreed. And they recommended Sirhan's release. After 55 years, that man's been sitting in prison for 55 years. And he's in his late 70s now. I don't think he's going to be hurting anybody. Unfortunately, though, California Governor Gavin Newsom disagreed and denied Sirhan parole.
Indeed so. It's all the more courageous, given what you've just told us, that RFK Jr. is now striking a number of political positions which directly threaten the military-industrial complex, the intelligence security complex, the CIA, and so on. He's now pledged to pardon Julian Assange and Edward Snowden if he becomes president. A very significant and important pledge.
Finally. Finally.
Yeah, even if he did nothing else, I'd probably vote for him on that alone. But is there any sense that he's placing himself now in the same kind of danger that his father and his uncle were in. In other words, are you and I, perhaps, God forbid it, going to be talking about attempts, at least, on the life of Bobby Jr.?
God, I hope not. But he knows the risk he's taking, without a doubt. I heard a reporter ask him recently the obvious question, what if they're trying to kill you? And he said, I'm not worried about my safety. So it's clear, George, that through this long process of waking up in his life, it's been a long road to where he is now, his red pill moment. I say better late than never.
Sure.
It's about time you joined us, Bobby. I'm glad you're here. But he's at that point. His children are grown. And as you know, his 27-year-old son, Connor Kennedy, has actually done a tour of duty over there in Ukraine with the International Legion, fighting with Ukraine. He's now back in the States, came home safe and sound, thank goodness. But he knew his father would not approve. So he didn't even tell Bobby where he was going. He didn't tell Bobby he was going off to war. He said, Dad, I'm going to be out of touch for a few months. I need you to trust me on this. I can't tell you what it is. I'll tell you later. And, after 2 months go by, Bobby starts getting worried. What happened to his son? So he's looking at credit card statements and he sees charges in Poland and Ukraine. Then he put 2 and 2 together, figured out where his son actually was. So, yeah, I think that Connor had to do that because he knew that his father wouldn't approve. And,
Sorry,
we just
Spencer,
saw
we could
this...
talk all night, but alas, all night is not available to us. How wonderful. Thank you for being with us again. Laurie Spencer, the independent journalist, author, and radio personality. Let me go through the poll. Did Ukraine try to kill Putin? On Twitter, 2,707 people voted. That's a lot for Twitter. And only 41% thought that Ukraine did try to kill Putin, 59% not. But on YouTube, 75% thought Ukraine did try to kill Putin, and 25% thought not. That was 2,020 votes. On Telegram, 79% said Ukraine did try to kill Putin, 21% said they had not. And on the YouTube community poll, where 7,300 people voted, it was 78% blaming Ukraine for trying to kill Putin. So something happened on Twitter. That can happen. At least they had to acknowledge our existence. Now, some super chats. People are giving very generously. Please keep donating. I can't emphasize it too much. A Golden Silence sends $5, says Russians have been patient up to this point. I think Ukraine crossed the line with the attack on the Kremlin. Keep reporting the truth. I will, as long as God gives me breath. Thank you for your donation. The Hitchcock, Tim Hitchcock, gives £2 British. God save the king, dumb drones. And Toy Chung sends 158 Hong Kong dollars. I have no idea, Toy, if that's a lot or a little, but I'm grateful for it either way. And Phil McGrath sends £10. Thank you, Phil. Doc Jazz, a regular supporter of the show, sends 50 AED. Stay safe, George, in the run-up to the US elections. I wonder what dirty, violent scheme Biden has up his sleeve later in the year to prevent the imminent defeat in Ukraine from messing up his chances. Thanks, Doc, as always. Petteron sends 45 Danish crowns and says, sharing both age and political heritage, I so appreciate your ongoing fight and information in these times of both hope and terror. What do you mean age? To the lines now. The legend from New York, Erobos, is on the line on the Kremlin attack. Erobos, as always, welcome to the show.
A most salubrious evening and greeting and salutations to you, your family and your loved ones, Mr. Galloway.
Thank you, brother.
Before I preface what I'm going to say, my perspective on what's happening at the Kremlin, I wanted to put a plug to you. I was thinking, I was listening to one of your Wednesday shows, and you were speaking to a caller, and I had a vision, in a sense, of you having a global international consultancy with your experience, with your decades in Parliament, with your, I know you should be in the Guinness World Book of Records for having 2 independent parties in the establishment parties and survived it and thrived and helped the people of your constituency out of the 195 countries in the world. And, I wouldn't doubt if you've been to all of them at least twice. I think you'd be a boon, especially in these electoral cycles or even out of electoral cycles. I think you would, you'd have a consultancy, and people could ask for the benefit of your anti-establishment, left political perspective and experience, and I think it would thrive. I think it's something that's very much needed in the world, and I wanted to plug that to you.
Okay.
As far as
Thank
my
you.
yes, as far as my perspective on what's going on in Ukraine, and you mentioned the Kerch Bridge, and you mentioned the assassinations of 2 prominent media officials. These were not even military people, right? There were no personal grievances. They just wanted to make examples out of them. My view is this is the results of this stepping on eggshells, pussyfooting around special military operation. I'm on Medvedev's side, right? And I side with you also with some of your perspectives about this. There is a way to preserve as much life as you can with the compatriots and the relatives and the historical connections with the people of Ukraine, and pretty much get rid of Zelensky, the regime, the government, the administration, the ministry of morons. Get rid of all those people and push those Galicia Nazis right back into the border of Poland, and maybe go after them there and finish what should have been finished in World War II. Again, this is my perspective. Yeah, it's outrageous. It's outrageous. I think, I don't know Putin, never met him, but my feeling is he still has this Peter the Great, residual thing about the turning to the West and the dependency on the West. I mean, he's a great statistician. He's a lawyer, as someone mentioned, just like Medvedev, but it's like, you need a firmer hand in dealing with this, right? Because, and the last thing I'd say is, you have experience with this, unfortunately. There were 3 times, if my memory served me correctly, the Neville Chamberlain, right, when he was sent by the Cliveden set, the aristocracy of the British oligarchy, he went to Hitler 3 times in the Bundestag, Hitler's summer house, and then the government residence. And every time he went to Hitler, Hitler was taking more and more Europe and laughing at him, right? Neville Chamberlain is the guy that's holding the umbrella. That's his iconic forever image, and that's all he was good for. And how did Hitler respond to all this appeasement and all this pussyfooting around? He bombed, I almost cursed because I'm outraged. He bombed the United Kingdom, and many people died and were traumatized, maimed, and I have no doubt that you have trauma from the scars of living through this period. And that's what appeasement with Nazis give you, because their only ideology is power. That's all they respect, the force of violence and power. That's Nazism. I read Mein Kampf. I read a couple more things from them, and that was the common denominator of all this literature. You are either Übermensch or Undermensch. That's it. Nobody else remains. And and so they need to take a stronger hand with this. And I've been trying to do a hashtag Medvedev is right. I don't know if it's going to catch on, but and I know time is always against us. So I want to thank you for allowing me the time.
Well, it was definitely the call of the night, Robust. Thanks very much for making it, and it will have found an echo in many places in Russia and beyond. Thanks indeed again for all the kind things about me that you said. Lee in Manchester wants to talk about Anthony Blinken and Victoria Newland. I'm always up for that. Go ahead, Lee.
Hello, George.
Hi.
Yeah. Well said to Erebos, who's just been on.
He was great, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was belting. And just I've just a little Google search, George. Anyone can do it. Victoria Newland's heritage is a grandfather, Ukrainian. So she's the main conspirator with Jeffrey Pyatt, Anthony Blinken, her husband, Robert Kagan. So Newland's heritage is Ukrainian. Blinken's grandparents, great-grandparents, Ukrainian. Kragan's ancestry is Lithuanian. Jeffrey Pyatt, who was the right hand of Victoria Newland in the Maidan coup, is Lithuanian. But each one of them, all four of them, are Jewish heritage as well, which makes it even worse to think that these people of that kind of heritage would associate with the right sector, with the Azovs. They must know what happened in Babi Yar, you know, to even put themselves in it. But is it some kind of a hatred from? Did they live under, the grandparents? The parents must have lived under the Soviets. Was they persecuted by the Nazis? Is this why they have this vested hatred of anything to do with Russia? But I
don't know.
People...
It's I'm stopping you only because of the hour, Lee. It was a very powerful call. I don't know what it is, but you're right to say that it's even worse. It's even worse that so many people who have made so much of the issue of anti-Semitism, the scourge, the specter of anti-Semitism, have absolutely no problem dealing with a government in Kiev that, at the very least, has as its main support militarily, paramilitarily, the far-right nationalist and even Nazi forces that you alluded to. What do I mean? I mean that the Maidan would never have succeeded if it were not for the thousands of right sector, Svoboda, Azov, and outright swastika flying, jackboot wearing, SS insignia branding, far right forces in Ukraine. That cannot be denied. Indeed, a Google search will show that every major news operation in Western countries reported on that exact fact that I have just imparted in all those years until it became inconvenient to do so. It is not true to say that all the leading Ukrainian Jews are oblivious to it. I often see prominent Ukrainian Jews denouncing the calling of streets and squares and public buildings after people who were there at Babi Yar, who heard the cries of the women and children being massacred at Babi Yar. And now they see in 2023 public squares being called after the killers of their grandparents. What kind of world is this? So that does happen. There's one man in particular who's the spokesman for the Jewish community in Kiev or in Ukraine, who regularly brings these matters up. And it's also even true that this is one of the reasons why Israel has not joined the war on Ukraine's side. It must be. But the supporters of Israel in the West, they know better. They know better than the Jews in Ukraine. They can easily, it appears, embrace the remnants, the dregs of the fascists of the Holocaust of the East. The Holocaust of the East may not numerically have been worse than the Holocaust of the West, but it was worse in this sense, that more than 1 million Jews and many, many others, Polish people who were not Jews, Russian people who were not Jews, Ukrainian people who were not Jews, but more than 1 million Jews were cold-bloodedly murdered up close and personal, not in concentration camps, not even in gas chambers, not in the industrialized, systematic way of the Holocaust of the West. No, these people were bayoneted in front of their parents, in front of their children. They were killed in pits filled with thousands of people. Read about Babi Yar. Watch the film Einsatzgruppen on Netflix. You don't have to go underground to watch it. It's on Netflix. As the survivors of these pits tell you who it was that massacred them. In most cases, it wasn't even the Germans that murdered them. It was the Ukrainian collaborators who are now the people who are getting streets and squares called after them in Zelensky's Ukraine. I've got time for one last call. I can't refuse him. He's a legend. It's Tommy in Glasgow. Go on yourself, Tom.
Love you, bit. Salaam alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah. Thank you, George. Can I just say, but I want to get 10 seconds on the Zelensky crackpot. But before I go to that, Tom, for anyone who's Irish persuasion thinking of giving a salute to Prince Tampon, we'll call him, think of Thomas J. Clark, shot 107 years ago today. Think of Bobby Sands, who had to suffer 42 years in a couple of days on a hunger strike. God bless the brother in Palestine who stood on 87 days in a Palestinian prison, maybe given the peace that he was so sadly denied, maybe given Jinnah. And also from Prince Tampon, I heard the other day that he's a descendant of Vlad the Impaler, the original Dracula. So from Prince Tampon to King Dracula. Now, what happened, and be careful anyone who is stupid enough to say whatever they want to say, you know, that stupid pledge, because the lords of old, the peers of old, they were butt lickers. You know, my wee granny goddess used to say, gets everything but his butt wiped. Well, they did get their butt wiped, they get their butt licked. And we move on finally to the butt licker of Ukraine. Now, he's hiding in Finland, and Finland themselves committed a massacre against the Jewish people, against the Russian people. So Vladimir Putin, get your finger out and wipe these Nazi scumbags off the planet. God willing.
Well, there you go. That's Tommy in Glasgow. Tommy's from our diplomatic wing, but a very powerful cry that will have been heard, I have no doubt. I've overshot my time by 2 minutes. Please forgive me for that. Only time left to tell you the result of the poll. 13,850 people voted, and overwhelmingly they concluded that Ukraine did try to kill President Putin. Well, it's been marvelous for me. I hope it was for you. I'll be back, God willing, on Sunday at the earlier hour of 7 p.m. UK time for the mothership, the mother of all talk shows. I hope that you'll be there, and I hope that you'll bring somebody else with you, because I want to be able to announce next week there's 1.5 million people. Good night.